Hey everybody, my name's Matt Samia and I head up the Blizzard film department. We make all the cool movies that you see as part of every Blizzard game. We're basically an all CG animation studio, just like the folks that make any of your favorite movies. We're organized into teams who focus on different parts of the production, from the concepting, previs, and storyboard guys at the beginning, all the way through modeling, animation, effects, lighting, and finally, the compositing team who output the final frames that you see on your screen. Star 2 was one of the most challenging projects we worked on this far and also one of the most rewarding. We had a chance to really stretch our storytelling in ways that we hadn't had a chance to in the past, especially with the in-engine flicks. And to tell you more about that, I'm going to pass it on to Nick Carpenter.
Hey, I'm Nick Carpenter and I am the Executive Art Director for Blizzard Entertainment, and today I'm going to be giving you guys an inside look at our real-time cinematic creation process. So one of the things that we were really excited to do on this project were to take these pre-rendered assets and get them into the real-time environment, and it allowed us to tell stories in a way we just hadn't been able to do before. These assets are extremely large and really hard to deal with, and in the real-time environment we were able to create these cinematics that lasted much longer, and we were able to explore stories from a different angle and really dig out these situations. We were able to take these super high-res maps and meshes and extract that information and get it into the real-time environment. When we actually started seeing this stuff being rendered in real time, we were super excited. So that pretty much wraps it up for me. I'm going to pass it over to Jeff Chamberlain, who's going to walk you guys through the cinematic creation process.
Hello, I'm Jeff Chamberlain. I'm the cinematic project lead for StarCraft 2. Making the StarCraft 2 cinematics was an awesome experience. It allowed us to tell the game's story in the traditional Blizzard cinematics way. We started the process writing the story with the other teams to ensure that it fit their criteria. We spent a great deal of time here because basically the story is the foundation for the cinematic process. Once the story was complete, we started working through the departments that Matt mentioned earlier to get to our final frames. This is an exciting time for our department. It's pretty much the bulk of our work. So in the meantime, we were working with the sound department to develop the scores and sound effects for the StarCraft 2 cinematics. Once we were able to marry all that stuff together, we realized that what started out as a really ambitious project ended up being the very real StarCraft 2 cinematics that you have in front of you today. So let's hand it over to some of our team members to give you an in-depth look at this amazing process.
My goal is to help the directors to visualize the asset in 3D as fast as we can, so then we cut all the back and forth between concept and modeling. One of the great examples of a character that has a really good and detailed displacement work is Kerrigan. We had the concept done, and the concept convey a great amount of detail, and then we build a base mesh that has all the right proportions and enough information to help us to add the detail on it. So when we started talking about StarCraft 2 and I knew we have to have a new design for the Marine, I started working with the concept artist back then and kind of exploring some ideas. So we came up with something that the director was really happy with, and the concept artist was able to take that to a completely different level.
So 3D pre-production, or the previs process, is the basics of creating the film for the first time in 3D. One of the main things to get out of a 3D pre-production is camera space and how the camera tells the story. Once the basics are there, you put into place, then we start assembling the scene. We start laying characters in and making a composition out of it. You basically pose a character and you put it in the scene, and when the composition is strong, then you can move on to animating it, do a general animation and staging the main actions in there. We'll start gathering reference. We'll even grab a camera and start filming ourselves in the parking lot or in our desks or wherever we can, and start planning the animation that way. Film reference is something we use a lot, and it helps us get through a lot of ideas and see what looks good on camera, what doesn't. We have the three main characters, Tychus, Raynor, and Kerrigan, all in the same space, and we needed to show an emotional battle between all three of them. We needed to show Raynor's longing for Kerrigan over all this time, and the finality of actually getting what he wanted. And we also needed to show the double cross between Tychus and Raynor. And we had to do this in these large metal suits. And so what we really relied on was these close, intimate shots of the facial expression. So we dug deeply into the acting, and we dug deeply into eye direction, speaking, getting a lot of the body language through the eyes, and getting a lot of the believability through the fleshiness of the face. Once you tell the story cleanly and clearly in 3D, then we can distribute all these individual assets and worry about adding more detail and adding more effects and more elements here or there.
Rigging is the process of hooking up controls to our characters that allow the animators to move them through the scene. One of our more complex rigs that we built for the cinematics was the armor suit for the Marine. You see them in the intro and all throughout the rest of the cinematics. There were many controls, over 200, to articulate everything from the arms moving around and the face shield down to all the little vents on the back and down the spine. So that presented a unique and difficult challenge for us to keep that whole thing together and rigid and still able to act, still able to give the performance that the animator was looking for. So we have the simulation process, and that's the process of deforming a character using a simulator. So the character of Kerrigan presented a number of different challenges for us, not the least of which is she's seen in 3 different forms throughout the cinematics. So another simulation task that we're responsible for is the simulation of all the hair in all of the shows. So in Kerrigan's dream, for instance, you see Kerrigan running around, wind blowing around, dust blowing around. That presented some challenges for us because we really needed to work closely with the effects team and the animators to make sure that the continuity was there, the wind directions were all correct. Her hair was blowing in the same direction as all the dust elements and ember elements and fire elements that were provided by the effects team.
When you're lighting a sequence, about half the equation is the lights and the other half is the shaders and how the surfaces react to the lights. As the shaders are being developed, the artist is looking at real-world samples of different materials and trying to mimic that in CG and how shiny the object is, how reflective it is, what coloration it has, just how it takes light in every way. So there was a lot of effects elements that we knew we had to create that we didn't know exactly what they needed to look like. We had an idea. You can kind of imagine what low-lying fog would look like, for example, but without actually seeing it in action, you don't get the nuances that sell it as being realistic. So one of the things that we did was we rented out a studio and we went and we shot practical effects basically. We shot, for example, dry ice pouring out of buckets and falling over the floor, and looked at it from many different camera angles to try to see what happens when it interacts with objects and moves around the objects. It was pretty fun. We got to do lots of things with like air cannons shooting through the ice to see what would happen when a character would walk through a foggy ground and how it would swirl around his feet. We also shot reference for doing dust, like heavy blowing dust in the air, where we took bags of flour and shook them in front of a fan and watched it go through the air. That was great fun. So compositing is a process that we use quite heavily here, and it allows us to really fine-tune the look of our shots in a fairly interactive way. When you're traditionally rendering 3D objects, it can take hours and hours and hours to produce a frame. What we found really useful, and we use this quite a bit, is we render everything out to multiple render passes. We basically split the lighting information from the surface information, and we will render out, in some cases, hundreds of different layers that we'll then bring in to our compositing package and reassemble. And when we reassemble it, that allows us to actually have fairly detailed control over each aspect of the lighting and the shader itself, how it reacts. We'll separate characters from environments and props from characters, and effects and everything and put it all back together. And it really gives us this exploded view of our whole scene that allows us to go into any area, focus on it, and change the look of it slightly. And so the real challenge is to pull it all together at the end and make it look like it was all rendered at once, and that every frame of our cinematic looks as good as it can. It looks like a painting, essentially.
So story mode is basically the single-player campaign of StarCraft 2, and cinematics part of it is to basically tell the story through story mode in the game. So what I am going to show you here is basically an overview of one of the characters in the game, Jim Raynor, and it takes place in Bar, which is the start of the game, and that's where we first introduced Jim Raynor to you, which is 4 years after the original StarCraft. Over here we can go over to basically a general model of Jim Raynor, which is basically just modeled, and we usually start off with a concept art for Jim Raynor, and then through that build a model and then go on to texturing. He is pretty much finished the model of everything we have, and after we apply all the UVs and do all the cool stuff for that, we also finish the texturing on Jim Raynor and put him straight into the game. Here Jim Raynor is in the game, fully lit and textured already.
We make all of our own assets. We don't actually reuse game assets. We looked at that very early on. It would have been great if we could have. The problem is all the game assets were designed to be viewed from this God view where you're looking down from anywhere from a couple of miles up. And so they're all designed to be looked at from that angle, which means colors have to be exaggerated. You can't have a lot of complex detail because it just turns into a noise when you're far away. Whereas we wanted to be really close to these characters. We wanted to be able to do close-up, tightly framed character shots, see the expressions on their face, see every detail. So for all of our assets, we started from scratch. We took their designs for the game assets, if we're going to be reusing the style of them or the actual unit, and we went in, we did new concepts to try to add a lot more detail, figure out what they would look at from different angles that you might never see them at in the game, and then sculpted them all out. So we had to come up with a lot of solutions to build a whole new pipeline. We had to figure out how can we work in individual shot files, get all of our characters in there, get them animating together, and then save out all that animation data, put it all back together later and get it into the game engine.
So thanks for hanging out and checking out the cinematic creation process, and we hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys on Battle.net real soon.